Chapter 11. Here Lies Buried. The next day Hugh told Master Blaheris of his curious dream out in the marshes of Avalon. Or was it a dream? It had seemed so real. As he thought back over the experience, he could hear again the dip of the barge's oars in the water and the wailing of the women. He could see the glint of gold in the crown of the dead king and the outline of his large body half hidden under the crimson pall on the bier. He could even smell the damp earth of the green sword at the edge of the abbey grounds and feel the springiness of it under his feet. 1,000 small details came to mind, as only happens when one passes through an experience intensely real and never to be forgotten. Yet now, in the light of common day, Hugh tried to tell himself that it must have been only a dream. The hermit listened as he recounted it with an increasing intensity of attention. He had carried the boy out of the airless hut and laid him in the shade of the big willow, for the day was unseasonably hot. Now he leaned over him, as if he feared lest a single word escape his ears. His eyes burned with eagerness, his pale gaunt face flushed, and his long powerful hands clenched and unclenched themselves as the narrative proceeded. When Hugh came to the end, he drew a great sighing breath. "Between the two pyramids," he repeated, "outside the old church. We must dig there. Aye, it is most right and fitting." He began to stride up and down restlessly, and Hugh, watching him, felt his own excitement grow keener. "But what do you think it all means, Master Blaheris?" he asked, raising himself on his elbow. "Who was the old king, and why should it be so important to dig in that particular spot? Unless... "That was King Arthur, undoubtedly." Blaheris paused in his restless striding and spoke with awe and conviction. "None has ever known where Arthur, the greatest king in the world, lies buried. There is a saying in the ancient Welsh tongue which goes thus: A grave there is for Mark, a grave for Uther, a grave for Gawain of the ruddy sword, but for Arthur's grave only a mystery. For a long time folk believed that he had never died at all, and that he would come again from some hidden fairy world to secure England when he had special need, or to usher in again a time of vision and adventure. To Avalon they bore him, the old stories say, to be healed of his wounds, or else to die, if so God willed." "To Avalon," repeated Hugh, "and that's what the peasants call the country round our Glaston, especially the marshland between Tor Hill and Beckery, the very place where that strange vision came to me." The hermit nodded, his great head solemnly. "Exactly," said he. "Avalon, and mark you, lad, how things are shaping toward the solving of our sacred mystery." "The mystery of the lost Holy Grail?" whispered Hugh, as the old man paused. He nodded his head again. "First the sword," he continued, "Excalibur. Think you it had lain in the mud of the salt marshes all those centuries since it was cast away? Lad, it would have rusted into nothingness long ago. There be those who know, both in this world and in the land of spirits and fairy folk, angels and demon powers, those who know when the time is ripe for the unveiling of great mysteries, for miracles." "Miracles?" said a voice behind him, and Blaheris turned with a start to see Dickon, his eyes round, his face eager. Hugh had seen him coming up the path from the marshes for his daily visit, but the hermit had been so absorbed in his own thoughts and words that he had neither heard nor seen him. "Miracles?" the boy repeated. "Who is talking about miracles? Has anybody seen my hereabouts?" He looked around as if he expected to find a very real and tangible one lying on the ground at his feet. Somehow the matter-of-fact way in which the boy spoke changed the atmosphere. In spite of his joking habit of thrusting his cap on a sunbeam to see if it might by any chance stick, things that were not solid, that you could not see and hear and feel, were not real to Dickon, and a miracle would have to be a very obvious one before he could see it. This practical side always seemed to jar a little on the visionary old hermit. Hugh turned again to Blaheris, a little uneasily. He was staring wordlessly at the boy, his face showing all too clearly the conflict of his emotions, annoyance at having his world of wonder and dream and mystery broken into, and a sense of loyalty and even affection which had been growing in him as the two had shared daily their anxiety over Hugh. "Tell him," said he at last, addressing Hugh. "Tell him your adventure in the world of fog and shadows out yonder, and tell him, Hugh, that we must take up the quest again, the sword and the quest. Because of my negligence, boy, it has been too long neglected. Aye, I will confess it, and because there is something about yon oblate that is—" He seemed for the moment unable to find the phrase which would express what he wanted to say, but he continued before either of them could speak. "Yon oblate hath always the effect of bringing my soaring spirit back to earth. He hath nothing in common with dreams and shadows and other world creatures. He is of this earth." Dickon grinned, and Hugh burst out laughing. It was so true. Yet were they not seeking that which was real and solid, a holy cup that actually existed? And if so, Dickon certainly might be more valuable in the search than the mad master of Beckery himself. But was the quest indeed for something that one could hold in one's two hands? Vaguely, uncomprehendingly, yet surely, Hugh felt that the Holy Grail was something infinitely greater, more meaningful than any object fashioned by man's skill out of wood or stone or metal. And that dream adventure of his in the fog out in the marshes of Avalon, was that perhaps a hint, an indication of the otherworldly side of the whole thing? Blaheris and Dickon had seated themselves on the ground beside him, and were waiting for him to begin. He told the story again, and this time it seemed to him in no wise a dream, but an actual experience. When he had finished, his listeners both kept silent for a long moment, each thinking his own thoughts. Characteristically, Dickon was the first to step from thought to action. He jumped to his feet. "By all the saints, what are we waiting for?" said he. "You get a dream all about King Arthur and Avalon, the time and place where your book says the Grail once was, and the dream tells you to dig, and where? Let's go to it." "Wait a bit, boy, wait a bit." Blaheris held up a detaining hand. "All must be done in a way fitting and proper, or the vision will leave us. It must be Hugh who puts pick into the earth first." "That's so," agreed Dickon, sitting down again, "and of course we must tell Father Abbot. We can't go digging by ourselves and without permission in the monks' cemetery. How soon will you be well, Hugh? And shall I tell folk, or shall we keep this secret till you get back to the Abbey?" "Tell them about the dream," said Hugh, "but don't say anything about what we hope to find buried there between the two pyramids." "You mean the Holy Grail?" said Dickon. "Aye," said Hugh, "that is what we are hoping for, isn't it?" "Buried with King Arthur, as indeed it might well be," added the hermit. "Not only the place, but the time is fitting. The sword, Excalibur, King Arthur's sword. Did I not tell thee my findings? It was but a short time back, and other things." "Aye, Master Blaheris, you were speaking of the sword when Dickon came in. Tell us more. Surely now there must be no secrets between us three." The old man nodded, but could not suppress a hesitant and doubtful look at Dickon. "You said that your finding the sword was near a miracle," Hugh prodded him on. "The dreaming mood was upon me." The hermit leaned his big frame against the willow tree close to Hugh, and, keeping his eyes upon him and away from Dickon, continued, his voice growing softer, more reminiscent. "My mind teemed with memories of old tales, of romance and brave deeds in the days of King Arthur and his knights. I was wandering in the lowlands over by the sea when suddenly my foot nigh trod upon it, the sword with its iron hilt all brown and rusty, and its great blade broken at the edges, dull and blunted. I picked it out of the ooze where the low tide had left it, and brought it here. I cleaned and polished and sharpened it. I slept with it beside me. I loved and cherished it almost like a live thing. And then the dreams began to come to me again, thick and fast, dreams of Arthur's day all mixed with the memory of stories that I told in Wales in my minstrel days, stories that I had forgotten, and forget again as soon as the dream leaves me." He sighed, lost in thought for a moment. "And then, what happened next?" urged Hugh quietly. "And then," continued Blaheris, rousing himself, "I began to wander again far and wide, the old stone lantern in my hand, the bell at my girdle, to ward off evil spirits, and frequently the great sword in my other hand, held high like a cross. It seemed to lead me out over the marshlands, and to the hills, Chalice, Weariall, Tor, and back again to St. Joseph's Chapel. I could not guess why my steps were drawn over and over again to the old church, deserted for so long, and then, one time, I found the entrance to the passage down into the cave of the well." Dickon started and opened his mouth to say something, but Hugh made violent signs to him to keep still. The old minstrel was sinking into one of his absorbed, dreamy moods, in which an interruption would startle and annoy him and be fatal to the continuation of his narrative. Inch by inch, not once but many times, I explored that cave for hiding places, for chests of treasure. I knew what it must be, a stage in the underground way where precious things must once have been hidden. And then, not many months since, I found the passage from the cave of the well to that stone-lined room, with its entrance cunningly concealed by the ombre doors, and along that passageway were niches and alcoves that must once have held treasures beyond count. How I hoped and prayed and hunted, my heart in my mouth, for that sacred vessel, the holy cup, but it was not there. It was not there. Dickon could contain himself no longer. What was there, by the saints? I wish I had come upon that passageway. Maybe there were all sorts of relics and saints' bones and things I could have added to my collection. Blaheris slowly and meaningfully nodded his head. Aye, said he, there was much. The great quest was closing in closer all about me, though I knew it not. My heart failed me, grieving that I had not found that one treasure. But, look, Hugh! He rose, moved swiftly into the hut, and dragged from thence the ancient black oak chest that Hugh had been wondering about ever since he had first seen it. Throwing open the lid, he began to take out its contents, handling each object with infinite care, and laying it beside Hugh so that both boys might see. There were a hauberk of linked mail, silvered, that glinted and shone in the sunlight, and a long, strong lance of tough ashwood, its iron tip blunted as with many battles, a mailed gauntlet set with gems, and a helmet of metal shaped like a peaked cap, with a bit of frayed silken cloth tied to it, a scarf maybe, or a belt once worn by some fair and noble lady, and given by her to her knight. Only shreds and tatters remained, yet one could tell from these the texture of it, heavy and rich and finely woven, and in the knot close to the helmet a glowing red gem still clung to it. Dickon whistled softly. And these must once have belonged to some knight who rode about adventuring, doing great deeds of valor, said he, his gay matter-of-fact boy voice subdued and awe-filled for once. A knight indeed, and very like a knight of the Round Table, for all these things be of King Arthur's day. The old hermit's great powerful hand touched first one object, then another with gentle carefulness. "But how do you know these things had anything to do with King Arthur?" asked Hugh, a little skeptically. "It is because of this, I know," said Blaheris, taking from the chest a final object wrapped in soft linen. The boys watched breathlessly as he unwound it, laying the wrappings aside, held in his hands with infinite care and tenderness a crystal cross about 1.5 feet square, even, with spreading ends, transparently clear, unblemished, lovely beyond words. Hugh and Dickon both exclaimed in astonishment, not only because of its beauty, but because both recognized at once that it was the cross Blaheris had drawn on a stone for Hugh, and the very cross the picture of which had adorned the chart and some of the other pages belonging to the book of the Saint Grail. Dickon seemed even more excited than the other. "It's the same," he whispered. "Hugh, I found that figure cut in the stone of—" But Hugh nudged him to be quiet, for the hermit was speaking again. "This crystal cross was there among all these things," said the old man, "and it is the one that was given to King Arthur by Our Lady herself. It was in the days of great adventuring, when all the knights of the Round Table had gone forth to seek the Grail." He paused for a long moment, then shook his head sadly. "The story once I knew it well, but alas, I have forgotten it again. Only I know she gave it to King Arthur after a vision." "Why, I know that story," said Hugh, sitting upright as the truth flashed upon him. "It is in the broken book. I know. I pieced the endings of it together a long time ago. He went to a chapel in an island surrounded by marshes." Blaheris, with a great sweep of his hand, indicated the marsh meadows all around them. "Beckery!" cried Hugh. "It could have been Beckery. The book said the chapel perilous." "Aye," declared the hermit, "and so it was this chapel once called. The stones lie scattered, the walls are down, the altar vanished, but the very spot whereon we are now sitting was once called that by name. But go on, boy. What happened to King Arthur here?" "He had a vision," continued Hugh. "Not here, but some place else, and he was bidden to go, in the dead midnight, to the Chapel Perilous, and there he found a mass being said by an old priest, and Our Lady appeared out of the shadows and assisted in the celebration, and after the service was over, she gave Arthur an even cross of clear crystal. I had forgotten the story, and a good deal of it was missing, still is in fact, and I never did understand why she gave him the cross or what it signified." "And this is it?" Dickon touched it gently as it lay in the hermit's lap. "And you found it, with those other things, in the passageway to our vault?" "Yes, I told thee it was so." Blæhris impatiently brushed the boy away, his mind having caught upon something else. "But there is something hidden in thy speaking, Hugh. The story, where didst thou come upon it? No minstrel knows, no one in all the world knows those stories of King Arthur and the Grail, save I myself, I alone. A book, saidst thou?" Hugh told him then, impulsively, all about the broken book in the painted aumbry, how he and brother John had found some written-over pages belonging to it, and then how he and Dickon had found more in the chest in the treasure vault. Blæhris listened with eager intentness, and, when Hugh had finished, still sat gazing down at him with eyes wide in his pale face, his lips parted in astonishment. "The lost book!" he cried at last. "The lost book!" he cried at last. "The lost book of the Saint Grail! And now the vision of the burial of King Arthur! Boy, do you not see how all the hidden forces are working together? The time has come. It must surely have come when the mystery of the vanished Holy Grail will be revealed." He wrapped up the crystal cross carefully again, and then gathered together in the other treasures he had spread out for the boys to see and replaced them in the chest, muttering the while, half to himself, half to the two, who were silently watching him. "I must see that book," he said again, and then, after he had dragged the chest back into its accustomed place in the hut, he stood in the doorway, looking first at Hugh, then at Dickon. When he spoke again, his voice sounded as if he were on the defensive, and as if they had been arguing with him. "They are mine," he said positively. "All of them mine. I found them. I have cleaned them, cared for them, cherished them, these treasures of King Arthur's day. The book should be mine also, and the cup, the sacred cup, if ever the saints permit us to see it," he sighed wearily.